Hello and welcome to Sports Marketing 101. Our guest today is Chris Samson, Digital Marketing Manager, English Premier League club Southampton FC. Chris is a graduate of the University of Stirling, having studied sports marketing here between 2008 and 2011. Following his graduation from the university, he joined Skyscanner, initially as a digital media executive and latterly moved into the role of Global Paid Marketing Manager. In 2021, he left Skyscanner to join Southampton Football Club as Performance Marketing Manager, and in August 2020 was appointed as Digital Marketing Manager at the club. Chris has been prominent within the sports marketing sector, particularly in Scotland, and in 2015 set up Sports Marketing Scotland, a website and latterly a podcast, which in his words aims to improve Scottish sports marketing industry one tweet, one podcast and one LinkedIn post at a time. Obviously, Chris has a wealth of expertise and experience which are directly relevant to a number of sports management courses and modules, not least sports marketing. So I'm absolutely delighted he's given up his time to share his thoughts and experiences. So without further ado, here's Chris Samson.
Welcome, Chris. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. As I know, there'll never be a lull in your job or a lull in the season. Even at the end of the playing season, I'm sure it'll be arguably an even more busy time of the year for you. So thank you very much for taking the time. As highlighted in the introduction, you're a University of Stirling graduate. You started sports and marketing here at the university. I never actually realized that we were studying at the same time until earlier this week. So that was a small coincidence. But I wondered if you could talk us a little bit through your time at Stirling and the nature of those courses that you studied, and then your first steps into your professional career beyond that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for chatting to me as well. I think it's really great to kind of talk a bit more about it and kind of look back. As you said, I think realizing when we did start chatting about this, like, it's been a long time since we both graduated. It's horrible to admit that now, but yeah, I think just getting into it, like, we had a quick chat before we started recording too, and like, I think you apply for it and you jump in those kind of like first early lectures that you get into it, and I don't think you fully appreciate at that point what you're then going to go on to do afterwards. You're still so young coming out of kind of secondary school. I was actually 17 when I started uni as well, so like really, really young and quite early on. I lived on campus for the first semester. I will be the first to admit I did not last very long at all. I lived like 20 minutes along the road from Stirling as well, and started to be homesick. I think if I went back now, I'd definitely attempt to change what happened and the outcome from that. But yeah, I think looking back in those kind of early courses as well, like we were saying it was kind of sports studies and business studies, and I think as well I decided to do law as like a third kind of option there, which I would definitely change if I went back now. I originally wanted to do Spanish as well as sports studies because I had done Spanish at secondary school to quite a high level. But annoyingly, the Spanish and sports studies lectures were on at the same time. So I had to change, and then fell into business, which obviously then led to marketing. And then here we are. It's kind of crazy how things just slot into place at times as well, which I think is probably one of the biggest lessons almost in terms of thinking back to that and thinking back to my career, that you almost can't plan what you're going to be doing for the rest of your career, so you kind of just have to roll with it sometimes. I think just fast forwarding a little bit, kind of obviously uni kind of speaks for itself. I'm sure we'll talk about and dig into a little bit more detail in some other bits, but after I graduated in 2011, God, that is a long time, I actually did struggle for quite a bit to get a kind of job related to my degree. So I was working at a pub in my local town in Lithgow. I'd worked there like during uni, and then continued and went full time there after uni, which was great. It kind of tided me over and kept me going in that respect. And I think I was obviously always on the lookout for kind of jobs, looking for kind of graduate stuff. I think the graduate kind of careers at the time, it almost felt like they were just starting up. almost. I think the situation now is probably way different in comparison to what it was back then. And obviously don't have much experience of it now in comparison to what it was then. But I think, I probably took a kind of wrong approach as well. So I was just kind of in that, because I had that job and I did enjoy it, albeit I didn't want to do it for a career. I think I just applied for like everything that I possibly saw that was vaguely related to anything to do with business or marketing or even sport at the time. But then luckily, through, and again, this is way more prominent now than it was back then, but through somebody that I spotted on Twitter, which was 2011, so Twitter must have been really, really new at the time, saw like a kind of a recruitment like kind of specialist at a local company in Edinburgh, and it was a 3-month kind of placement almost for an intern to go in at a company that I'd never heard of before called Skyscanner. Fell into that, had absolutely no idea what I was doing for the first 3 months of that placement, and on the last day of the placement they turned around to me and said, "Do you want to stay full time?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, like I'll do it." And then from there in must have been 2012, 2013, something like that, and was there for 8.5 years at the end of it. So yeah, it is kind of crazy the way that things work out.
So yeah, you found that kind of transition from university and getting those kind of first steps were a little challenging in terms of just getting that break, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think looking back, it definitely was. It was challenging, but also I wasn't going into it in the kind of right way. Like I didn't do it in the right way at all. Like I thinking back now, I should have spent way more time on the job applications that I was putting in. I should have researched the companies that I was actually applying for. I should have potentially reached, like, I don't know, if you've got LinkedIn now, for example, you can obviously see who all works for a company, what jobs they do, kind of what their experience is as well. Like, I wasn't doing anything like that at all. It was literally just like kind of data entry, almost putting in some of my very limited details into a job application. So I would go about it in a completely different way now, definitely.
Okay, that's certainly good to know. I'm sure maybe we'll come on to later on, you know, what kind of tips you would offer somebody that wanted to go and work in the sports industry later on. So yeah, Skyscanner, obviously now most people will have heard of Skyscanner, big unicorn company, weren't they, at the time as well? What was that like in terms of sort of honing your skills in the kind of marketing sense? Because your job was related to marketing manager, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was. I kind of look at it now, and it was very much this kind of specialist job. So again, when I started, literally those first few months were kind of data entry, like auditing, a few bits and pieces. But the team that I worked in, again, I think we'll get onto this probably, but during uni and learning about marketing and business and even obviously sport to one side at that point in time, because Skyscanner wasn't in that space at all. Like I don't remember this kind of like marketing function almost being taught to me. Again, hopefully it's changed now because it is a massive space. But I think that, again, if you're interested in marketing and you're interested in that industry, like you probably know way more about it now because it is so much, like the information around marketing is so much more readily available now. It is everywhere, as opposed to thinking back then it was a little bit more primitive almost, albeit still we were like marketing was massive then, but it's even bigger now, I would say. So I hadn't learned anything to do with it. It was kind of like, I think you would probably class it generally as like digital marketing, but it was more paid marketing. So the role that I was in was basically Google Ads. So if you go to Google and search for cheap flights from Edinburgh, flights to London, my job was to make sure that Skyscanner ranked first, and if we didn't rank first, then we would be second, and we were at least in that kind of top 3 or 4 listings, and making sure that we were driving as much traffic to the website as we possibly could, and that built up over the time. Eventually, yeah. So initially when I joined, it was just supporting the rest of the team members there, so doing kind of what you would probably class as like admin tasks. But then eventually we took on a kind of new market of Poland. So we were moving into the Polish market to market on Google in the same way. And then kind of took it from there, and you start managing more and more markets. My job in that kind of first 3 months was just supporting in the UK market. And then I eventually went on to managing that market as well, and kind of leading the strategy for how we do like paid marketing in the biggest market that Skyscanner operates in, which is the UK. So it was a kind of crazy journey from literally just being an intern and being there for 3 months to then having been there for so long and kind of leading that strategy in that perspective. So yeah, I loved it, but I think I think paid marketing, and again, we'll probably get onto this when we talk a bit more about my role in football at the moment, is a bit of a lesser known function within marketing as well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend anybody goes out and kind of researches that a little bit more if it's not already known to you.
Yeah, great. No, that's some good advice there. So you know, as you say, you worked your way through Skyscanner, and presumably you sort of learned your trade a little bit in terms of that digital marketing aspect of things. Tell us about your sort of what you're doing now in terms of being at Southampton. How was that transition from Skyscanner to Southampton Football Club?
I think it was difficult at first because, again, I feel like I'm like spoiler alerting, but we'll probably get on to talking about a few other bits and pieces later on. But I'd always wanted to work in sport and football in particular, and I then moved down to England, and kind of that opportunity like came up for me. There was roles at football clubs that were related to my specific experience. So again, like I said, I'd built myself up to Skyscanner to be kind of managing the paid marketing for our kind of global operation in a team of say 5 or 6. So we kind of split everything up into, like, Skyscanner operates in about 50 countries across the world. So we had 50 markets and countries that we were all managing. Obviously, I didn't manage all 50 of them, but we kind of split things up there. So that experience of doing that and focusing on what the best possible ways that we could convey the Skyscanner brand in those specific countries to get people to click on our adverts, to then come to the website, to then hopefully book a flight, to then earn Skyscanner some money off the back of that money that we've paid to Google to get that click in the first place. I think that was the key kind of point that you take on to a future role. So the role at Southampton came up, so it's kind of performance marketing manager, which is very similar in terms of you are managing the entirety of the paid marketing across the football club. So again, just to go into my role a little bit, it is that it's less Google now than it was at Skyscanner, and I would be lying if I said I didn't wing how much experience I had in kind of paid and Instagram and Facebook in comparison to what I'd done at Skyscanner. It was very much Google focused, and not much else outside of that. But Southampton is very different. It is predominantly Facebook and Instagram and paid marketing in that sense. A little sprinkling of Google. Obviously, Twitter is Twitter these days, so we don't do too much paid marketing there. And LinkedIn's actually quite a big one as well, which we can maybe get onto later on too. So it's kind of taking those core skills that you learn and knowing the marketing platforms and the channels that you're across, and just like learning by doing, basically, which I think is one of the key points. Like I didn't have much experience in Facebook paid at all, but as soon as you get into that kind of back end of the ads manager platform, like you just kind of pick up some stuff because you know it so well from Google. They're all really quite similar in terms of the way that campaigns are set up, the way that you target somebody, like set a budget, see how much you're going to spend over that period, and then hopefully get some revenue back off the people that you send to the website to ultimately do something. Obviously at Skyscanner, we wanted people to book flights. At Southampton, we want people to buy tickets to come to a match, to buy a shirt, to buy a soccer school for their child, for example. Like, it's all similar in that sense. It's just kind of making sure that we're doing the best we possibly can to drive those people to the website at the end of the day.
So you joined Southampton as the kind of the paid performance, looking at that aspect of how the club was performing. That, so you're now the digital marketing manager. I mean, what does that actually entail? Could you talk us through what your duties are involved in terms of that title?
Yeah, definitely. So when I first started at the football club, they were previously working with an agency called Two Circles, who ran all of the email marketing for the club, and supported on kind of how the club manages its database and all the data that it's got across fans. And then they were also doing the paid marketing as well as all of that too. But it was much more limited in the time that they spent on that. So the club wanted to bring that side of things inside the club, hence why they put a job out, hence why then I spotted that and applied for it. So originally my role, like I said, was just to manage that paid side of things. So across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google, anything that you can possibly pay for an ad on, it falls under my remit at the club. That hasn't changed at all. The only thing that's changed from going from a performance marketing manager to a digital marketing manager is that the email side of things now falls under my remit as well. So the previous CRM manager who did that left the club, and I kind of stepped into that role just to cover off, but the club thought I did a good enough job, so the two roles kind of merged. And yeah, so now I look after, as well as all of the paid marketing side of things, I manage a team of 2 CRM executives who build all of our emails that we send to fans on a daily basis. And I also kind of oversee that Two Circles relationship from the data side of things that we hold on fans as well.
So just quickly, you say CRM, that's client relationship manager system, isn't it? So just talk us through what that actually means in practice for anyone that's perhaps unfamiliar.
Yeah, definitely. So again, acronyms are massive in marketing. So I think CRM, kind of client customer relationship management, like we hold a lot of data on our fans because they sign up to buy season tickets and they come and buy match tickets, or they buy a membership, or they buy the new shirt that we bring out in the summer. We have all of that on our fans, and thankfully some of those fans choose to opt in to hear more from the football club as well. And yeah, it's just kind of dealing with that. Like we obviously have to comply from all the legal complexities around GDPR, but yeah, we've got a lot of data on our fans, and one of the key commercial kind of performance indicators is growing that number of fans. There's a little bit of work that Two Circles did previously, and the club kind of have adopted. Southampton is in a unique position where it hasn't sold out its stadium in the time that it's been in the Premier League. So Two Circles did a piece of work where if we can gain enough people in the club's database, then when we're emailing them, obviously we can encourage as many people as possible to come season ticket holders, but we then also have enough people to email as a pool of people that will buy match by match tickets as well. So we can try our best to fill out the stadium. We obviously do fill out the stadium sometimes, but normally they are for the bigger matches in terms of when Man City, Man United comes to town. So yeah, I think, and again, I'm probably spoiler it, I'm one of your questions for later too, but before I joined Southampton, I didn't fully appreciate the power of email marketing. Like, I think it's absolutely massive, and it is the third biggest traffic driver through our website after people who go to Google and search for anything to do with Southampton, or people who come directly to southamptonfc.com. Email comes after those two in terms of how many people we drive to the website and how much money the club makes from a marketing channel as well. So obviously in that, email, and the difference between email and Google, or like organic Google and direct, is that email falls under our control as well. So we have much more ability to be able to push out messages we want fans to see, and we want to encourage them to take an action off the back of that. So yeah, it's absolutely massive.
One thing I would really like to ask you about is some of the key differences between working in marketing for an agency or an organization like Skyscanner versus now working in the sports industry and working for Southampton Football Club. So what are some of the kind of peculiarities around working within the sports industry and the marketing of sport, which are very, very different from the likes of Skyscanner?
I think when I thought about this question, and originally I was going to say that obviously you are in no way in control of what happens, because it is so reliant on 11 people kicking a ball around and trying to score a goal. But then I thought back and I was like, well, Skyscanner was so reliant on people being able to travel, which obviously COVID took away from so many people during lockdowns and all of that. So no matter what business or industry you're in, like, it will be impacted by something. But I think the uniqueness of football is obviously that we don't, I'm kind of oxymoron in myself because I've just said that Southampton don't fill out their stadium, but we have a core passionate fan base that is probably going to come whatever happens to the football club. Southampton have been down to the Championship before, they've been down to League One before, like, they've come back up again from that, and fans have been there the entire time to see all of that. That's not really the case for any other industry whatsoever. Like, you can easily change who you book a flight with, if we're talking about Skyscanner. So yeah, I think it's that kind of core, loyal, passionate fan base that will always come forward and give you some feedback on how things are performing. We get a lot of replies to our emails, I'm sure you can imagine as well. It gives people a chance to vent, but also we get a lot of kind of useful insights that we can then take forward and use in future emails or future marketing campaigns as well. So yeah, I think that the big difference for me is just that, core, loyal, loud, noisy fan base.
Would you say that was one of the kind of the upshots, or one of the kind of the positives about working in sports marketing, is that you do have such an engaged audience that have this kind of affinity to these clubs? As you say, they're not going to change their team necessarily, but they might change who they. So that would be, what would you consider to be some of the difficulties in terms of your role in that sense?
It is difficult because, again, like, we're so, or at least we try and be so in tune with what the current feeling of the general fan base is. Obviously, can't deny that this season has been an easy one in terms of that. Like, we've lost way more than we've won, and we just have to kind of tailor that approach to what that general feeling is. It is a positive and a negative, absolutely. Like, fans will come forward and they are more likely to be quieter if things are all great, which has challenges in itself. Obviously, you get a few kind of slipping through the net that are happy to come and chat to us and give us some feedback on how things are going. But yeah, I would say that it's definitely a difficult thing to kind of approach and try and manage in the best way you possibly can. Really quick example, when we, not always, but sometimes we will take kind of temperature checks of kind of fan sentiment and potentially not send a post-match email to the fans directly in their inboxes to detail a defeat that we've just had, for example. We do try and do it on every occasion because you don't want to change the way that you're acting just because of what happens on the pitch. But yeah, there's been a lot of times this season where we haven't really sent anything after matches to fans just because we just don't think it's been right to do that at the time. So yeah, it brings downsides because you want to be going out to fans, you want to tell them what's happening around the club, but at times it's just not right to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, no, that's really interesting, isn't it? How your approach changes based on the performance with something which kind of completely out with your control in that sense.
To get super nerdy, sometimes we use the ELO rating of the match as well to determine whether we send an email or not. But that's us just going kind of next level.
And quickly tell us what the ELO rating is.
I don't actually know what ELO stands for.
Okay.
maybe you do. But it's basically just like a data point that an external company puts together based on kind of like where clubs rank alongside each other and in a big massive list of like all clubs. So yeah, we try and use data points to determine it, but obviously we then most of us go to the matches anyway, so we know how fans are feeling, or we think we know how fans are feeling. So we do try our best there.
So just quickly taking a step back from before you joined Southampton, actually, and whilst you were still working at Skyscanner, I'd really like to hear about Sports Marketing Scotland, which you set up, I think, in 2015 as a website, and then latterly as a podcast. Just tell us a little bit about what motivated you to want to start that, and what your kind of motivation was to get it going.
Yeah, definitely. It probably stemmed directly from university, to be honest. Obviously, there was that little bit of a lag in terms of timings of setting that up after I finished at Stirling. But because I'd studied sports and marketing studies, I always then, following kind of going down that route as my degree, like I'd always had that interest in the business side of football and the business side of sport. So after uni, I actually had like a random kind of like website. I'm sure originally it was on like Tumblr, which people listening to this potentially in the future might not even know what it is because it's really not a big thing anymore. But yeah, like branched out to having a website, and then that kind of morphed into Sports Marketing in Scotland as well. So Sports Marketing in Scotland actually started because I was really active on Twitter at the time, as you could probably tell because I got my job at Skyscanner through Twitter. But I started to follow kind of people who worked in the industry, and had spotted that a chap called Greg Mailer had moved from UEFA to Hibs in Edinburgh. So I was like, hold on, that seems like a strange kind of move in a marketing or commercial space. So I just randomly reached out to him and said, can I have a chat to you? I've got potentially some questions to ask you. And that was like, I can't even remember what the old website was called, but after that chat, I basically rebranded it into Sports Marketing Scotland, because following chat to Greg, I was like, there is a massive gap in the industry, if you like, in inverted commas, for nobody really talking about this in the sports space in Scotland. So yeah, trying to convey what's happening currently in the industry that could potentially inspire more people to work in it, to then all of those things laddered up to make it as good as it possibly can be. So yeah, chatting to Greg, who's obviously had some amazing experiences up until that point, went into Hibs, and then obviously yeah, I think his time at Hibs was hugely eye-opening for me in terms of following that chat. We obviously kept touch. I attempted to work for him a few times while he was at Hibs as well, but albeit it never really came to fruition. And yeah, we've kept touch since. Obviously, he went on to work at the Scottish FA, and then he went to Man United, and now he's at Brentford. So he's had, excuse me, an amazing career since that too. But up until that point, he'd already had an amazing career, given he was at UEFA. I can't remember where he was at before that, but I think he'd worked in kind of some Scottish clubs before he went to UEFA too. So yeah, I think him coming into Hibs kind of changed my entire perspective. And yeah, that's kind of why I started sports marketing in Scotland. Uni experience and then kind of thinking there's a little bit of a gap here for me to shove myself into.
Yeah, so just quickly talk us through the type of content that you put on the website, because it's not just interviews, is it? It's a mixture of interviews and sort of opinion pieces around the marketing of sport, obviously in Scotland.
Yeah, and to rewind a little bit too, you referenced it in your initial question around sports marketing in Scotland, but because I was at Skyscanner at the time and I kind of fallen into that, loved it, but still had that like desire from uni to really do something in the sports marketing space, in particular. Like working at Skyscanner gave me the opportunity to do that a little bit on the side as well. So I don't think it would have been possible if I was already working in sport, if that makes sense. Which again, if you fast forward a few years now, I do work in sport. There's significantly less that I do in sports marketing in Scotland because it's just so manic all the time. But yeah, I think that I kind of set out to just get people's thoughts who were already working in that space across to more people. And because I was an outsider to it as well, I thought that my experiences working at Skyscanner, studying at Stirling, like looking across that whole industry as well, I thought my thoughts could really help other people as well. So yeah, I kind of set it up as a little bit of, I would convey some things that I thought at the time, and then get other people to do that too. So we've had really some amazing guest posts on there as well from other people who were interested in that space, again, who had followed on Twitter and randomly fired off messages to. But yeah, managed to get some really good interviews as well, which I still read some of them now, which is quite strange to say out loud too, because I still think there's some really useful stuff in there that a lot of people could take even just one bit of inspiration or an idea away from. So yeah, that was the main reason about why I set it up, and that's the main kind of content pieces that originally went up there.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Greg Mailer as being as part of a kind of a reason for wanting to rebrand it, and a bit of an inspiration behind wanting to fill that sort of gap in what was out there. But was there one particular piece or one particular article that you had on the website that was like, this sort of changed your mind around marketing? Like, what was there, or is there a particular example that you thought that really was enlightening for you in some way?
I think Greg's was probably the main one, just from that starting point of chatting to him, like getting his experiences across in that way. Like it really opened my eyes in terms of what is possible and how somebody thinks in that space when they actually work in that space as well. One I also always think back to, and I don't read it back because it is so long, but there's so much in there, is George Francis, who worked at Partick Thistle at the time too. I remember chatting to George, and I don't think I'm lying here, we were literally on the phone for about 2.5 hours. And then at the time, I used to then listen back and like transcribe the interviews to create like a written word piece. And I think it was probably chatting to George that I was like, right, this has got to be a podcast in some possible way, because I can't keep going on and looking back and transcribing written pieces onto the website from 2.5 hour conversations, because it took me so long. But George had so much to say and Thistle had done so much up until that point as well. Like, again, people on your course and people watching might know Kingsley, might not know Kingsley, but Partick Thistle's mascot became like a viral sensation phenomenon that just went global, and George was involved in that, and that was kind of the main premise of why I wanted to speak to George in the first place, because like that doesn't really happen to Scottish football clubs. It doesn't really happen to clubs like Partick Thistle. So like telling that story then hopefully inspired more people to try and do stuff like that at clubs that they maybe worked for, or things that they wanted to do. So yeah, I think George is probably one that sticks out in those early days anyway of why I or like what I put on the website.
Great. And thinking, I suppose, about that, you know, you had that keen interest not only in Scottish football but sport within the country, writing pieces, you obviously taking a really keen involvement in it. Were there any examples, or is there any examples or experiences that you've had where you're like, there's one organization that really gets marketing and they do really well as an organization rather than as an individual, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, because like I think it probably changes and has changed a lot since 2015 even. I think thinking back then, my approach the whole time has probably been, and it's difficult to say this like kind of publicly on Twitter or anything like that, but like I've kind of tended to ignore what Rangers and Celtic do and shout about that, because they are on a different level to any other club in Scottish football, and probably a lot of English clubs as well, just in what they can do. And like I said earlier, those passionate, hardcore, loyal fan bases that they both have, they don't really need to do too much to sell a range of merchandise that they bring out, for example, or sell a season ticket. They can do what they want with a season ticket campaign. It doesn't need to really sell the Rangers or Celtic product. So like I think they've kind of been on that different kind of stratosphere from all of the clubs, but that's not to say that you can't look at what Celtic and Rangers do and think about how that could translate over to your smaller club. So yeah, I've always thought in that way, in terms of you treat them at almost like an arm's length, but you still follow what they do from that perspective. Like I think back to a couple of years ago, and I think they've done it since as well, but like Celtic had like a festival at the SCCC, I'm sure. Like obviously that's not in that same level. Like if you're a League Two club in Scotland, you probably can't host a festival at the SCCC, but what's not to say that you couldn't do something similar around your stadium, for example. So there's always kind of inspiration and ideas that you can probably take from elsewhere. But yeah, I think it's like other examples of somebody who's done it consistently are difficult, because there's been so many changes across the time. Like again, you look at Hearts and Hibs and Aberdeen, they've been amazing. Like Motherwell as well is always the big example. And we had a kind of running joke on the Scottish football marketing podcast, where Motherwell were just kind of mentioned by everybody on every single episode, because the team there kind of got what they were all about, and they knew what the fans were like. They knew how to speak to their fans, and they knew how to get fans on side with kind of everything that they were doing, and everything was geared up to that as well. So there wasn't a social media post that went out that didn't have a purpose behind it, which I think is one of the biggest takeaways to think. Like so many kind of sports organizations, not just in football, don't think in that way. So yeah, I think probably if it's an example to take away is probably Motherwell, because they've been most consistent across that period of time, I would say.
Great, thank you. And I suppose just lastly, really, because I'm sort of conscious of your time, but I'm interested to know what you think have been sort of some of the major trends and changes in marketing since you started the website back in 2015. Like what what have some of the trends over that period of time been, and what do you see as being the kind of future trends for the immediate future as well?
Yeah, there's been a lot of trends definitely in that time. It's really difficult to whittle some down. I did try my best to rack my brains and have some thoughts. I think it can't really be understated like how massive video is in comparison to even what it was in 2015. Like the clubs that are really kicking themselves forward and pushing themselves on are the ones that have invested in a videographer that works for the club, or kind of uses students in that space as well who are studying. Like you can see the difference in their marketing output and what they're able to produce in comparison to other clubs who are much more kind of behind the curve in that space. And Hearts, for example, are a big one, and like the quality of their video output is so good, and you almost like don't appreciate it until you kind of look at another club and see, well, why are they not doing something like that? Because like surely they can see that Hearts are producing that, and surely they can see the kind of impact it has in the way that they're able to showcase Tynecastle and the club and the players and the kind of everything around the club. So yeah, I think video coming to the forefront is obviously massive. And then I don't know, I'm not really on the kind of current trends of TikTok or anything like that, but it is obviously, it can't be understated how massive that is at the moment too. And kind of one video can get the amount of views that you've potentially had over the entirety of your club's lifetime, if it hits in the correct way. So yeah, I think like longer form, medium term, and then like medium and then short form video is probably the biggest trends that I could probably try and get across. But I think as well, just in terms of that, like clubs needing a purpose as well, like I think that is so big these days, and probably not just clubs, like even like players having a purpose in the club, trying to use that in a positive way. Like Marcus Rashford is obviously the biggest example of that, from everything that he did during COVID and lockdowns and stuff. But yeah, I think there's so many like kind of players that have stories to tell, and the clubs that tell them are the ones for me that like are currently on that trajectory. But yeah, so many clubs don't, and I think that's a shame, because like players want to buy in. Fans want to buy into the players as well, and I think if you're able to convey that, then it obviously gets the player across to the fans. It gets the player across to potential future suitors if they want to get bought, but then it also benefits the club as well in that immediate term, but also potentially longer term too. So yeah, I think those would be kind of the two couple of things that I would call out.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to ask one last question of you, Chris, which is, if you were offering any advice to sort of current students, or not even necessarily students, but anybody that had an interest in getting into sports marketing, what would some of your kind of key tips be in that sense?
I think I probably gave a few bits of advice at the start in the first couple of questions, but definitely take the time to put the effort in to any jobs that you're applying for, because I didn't, and it was at my detriment for a couple of years. So I would definitely recommend to do that. I think the other thing that I would do is just shove yourself into opportunities. Like that's what happened to me after I started sports marketing in Scotland. Like nobody else was doing it, and I spotted an opportunity and just kind of ran with it. Like we didn't really touch on it, but obviously it became a podcast. But the reason it became a podcast was because I'd started it. I was talking about it in that space. Darryl Broadfoot, who was like communications director at the time for the Scottish FA, invited me onto a panel at Hampden for like the Hampden Convention, which used to be a thing that ran, which was, I was kind of like a fan. Obviously I was an outsider to that industry. And then from that, I started to speak to Michael Bokel, who was the digital manager at the Scottish FA at the time. Greg Mailer then joined the Scottish FA, and he was like, why don't you guys start a podcast together? And then everything just kind of stemmed from that. Like it was because I started Sports Marketing Scotland, it then opened up so many more avenues and opportunities for me to do way more and kind of tell more people about all of the good stuff that is happening across marketing in sports in Scotland. So yeah, I think spot an opportunity or make yourself an opportunity if you want stuff to happen.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your experiences with us as well, Chris. That's greatly appreciated. And yeah, good luck with the rest of the season. Good luck with the rest of the time with Southampton, and look forward to seeing what happens in the future.
Cheers, Andrew. Thanks very much.